Hello my little raindrops, my name is Allie and today we're going to be talking about Evernight. So for those of you who don't know, even though you probably do if you clicked on this video, Evernight is a 𝚘𝚑𝚐𝚑 horror subscription and it has officially been going on for an entire year now. It is a quarterly subscription, so there have only been 4 books that have come out, and because they are done with this whole end of the year thing, I just wanted to really quickly go over my thoughts on their books. Now you guys might be wondering, well, you're going to look at the whole subscription and yet you only have 2 books in your hand. Yes, and I will explain that with every book. I only have the last 2 physically on me anymore, but as I break this video up into sections explaining my thoughts on each of the books, I will go into more detail about that. Now, I'm going to be basing my ratings not only just based on the quality of the books, but also the design of the books and the stories themselves. And at the very end of this video, I will do a recap, just kind of overall looking at what I think about the subscription and just sort of rating the subscription as a whole. So in July of 2023, they came out with their very first book, Silver Nitrate. Now, I don't have a physical copy of this book because I was not only not on their subscription at the time that this book came out, but I also just was not very interested in the story. The plot just didn't really speak to me, and so I never really wanted to spend the money to get my hands on it secondhand. First, I want to talk about the design. So this was Evernight / 𝚘𝚑𝚐𝚑's first ever Evernight book. And so I think that a lot of people were kind of expecting the book to not be anything super fancy, super great. A lot of people, I think, were kind of expecting them to have a few trip-ups with this subscription. But to a lot of people's surprise, this book was in basically perfect. The book was really well made, at least as far as what I've seen. I really love the design of this book. I love the front, the like silver foiling that they have going on, and it has this rune type of design that overall just looks very clean and very nice. And then the sprayed edges for me are a little bit iffy. I don't really mind the sprayed edges. However, I will say that I do think that the sprayed edges go really well with the rest of the design of the book. The actual dust jacket itself is just a recoloring. I believe that the original book is a red foiling and the 𝚘𝚑𝚐𝚑 version is silver foiling. I will give it to 𝚘𝚑𝚐𝚑 / Evernight because I believe that ever since that very first book, they've done full redesigns of their covers. Now the end papers, I believe, are the same, both front and back. But I love the design of like this dog, this 2-headed dog that it has going on. And after I read the book, it was a scene from the book that happened a little bit later on. I'm starting to realize that most of these Evernight books, the end papers actually are scenes of what happens inside the book, which is just another attention to detail that I really appreciate from them actually. Now the actual story itself is where this book falls a little bit short for me. I wasn't really a big fan of the plot of this book, so take what I say for this book specifically with a grain of salt because I knew that I wasn't going to really like it going in. So I did read this book. I read it a few days ago. I wanted to make sure that I still read the book itself because I wanted to do this video and I didn't think it was fair if I had just ranked the rest of the 3 books and I hadn't really looked at this one. And it was surprisingly better than I thought it was. I completely thought that I was going to give it like a 1 star. I still was not a huge fan of the whole movie setup plot that they had doing. Like the main character was someone that worked in audio, and then the second main character, he was like an old actor. I didn't really care for the whole silver nitrate film. That's magic. The movies were spells. I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of that plot point at all. So on Goodreads, I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars, and I'm still sticking with that rating. I think most of the Goodreads review stars that I have given all of these books are pretty accurate to how I still feel, even after having time to think them over. I thought that the book started out kind of slow, and I wasn't really a huge fan of some of the plot points in this book. And I wasn't really a huge fan of the extreme over-explaining that there was in certain points in this book, to the point where I felt like some of the stuff that was being explained wasn't even actually relevant to the story itself. Overall, I thought that the book was a little dry. I also didn't really think that there were many horror elements in this book. I will give it to the book that towards the end, it did kind of pull things together, but for the first half of the book, possibly even 75% of the book, I just felt like it wasn't enough. Overall, it just didn't really have as much horror to me as I would have liked, especially for a horror subscription. But yeah, overall, I'd rate the book about a 2 out of 5, and that is my full review for Silver Nitrate. Now, moving on to their October 2023 selection, which obviously October horror, it is the month of horror, so I was really looking forward to this book. Now, this book was The Last to Leave the Room, and it's basically about a woman who finds this door in her basement, and basically her doppelganger comes out of it. Long story short, let's just start off with the design of the book itself. I thought that this book was absolutely beautiful. I once again was not on their subscription quite yet, but when I saw how it looked when other people started opening it, I absolutely fell in love with the design of the book. The dust jacket is this beautiful, like, orange color with this really creepy cap that looks like it's being pulled apart, kind of giving off this doppelganger look to it. That book was definitely really strong in the horror elements in terms of design, more than I think Silver Nitrate was, personally. I also really loved the sprayed edges, because the sprayed edges were kind of these cat eyes and teeth, and it really tied in very well with the front cover. Underneath the dust jacket, I will admit it was a little bland. I believe there was no design on the back, and it was just a plain black hardcover with a white door with like this cat eyes fangs kind of coming out of it at the very front. And the end papers, the front end papers were just the door itself, and I believe the main character was also on that. And then on the back, it was the main character with her doppelganger. So even though that the design was a little bit bland underneath, I just really loved that dust jacket, and I kind of wish that they had printed the dust jacket design onto the actual book itself, because I thought that that was just phenomenal. So I had basically bought this book secondhand, and I had read it pretty quickly after I had gotten it in the mail because it intrigued me so much. And so this is where we get to the plot point of this book. I also gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and I was extremely disappointed in this book. I felt like it was kind of trying to teeter on this line of horror and sci-fi, but a lot of things in this book just weren't mixing very well. The plot was trying to do this anomaly with this company that the main character worked for, and I don't even remember like what that whole thing was about. All I knew is that it was kind of tied to the doppelganger situation. The twist at the end of the book was just like, it was a good twist. It was a decently good twist at the end of the book, but so much of the book had been so bland and so difficult for me to sit and read through the 250, 300, 350 pages. I don't remember how many pages this book was, but it was too many to sit through a super bland story where I didn't really know what was going on, and I felt like it was more sci-fi than it was horror. I didn't like this book so much that almost immediately after closing it, I had listed it and basically sold it, because I loved the design of this book and the story was super promising, but I was so disappointed in the actual story itself that I just didn't want the book on my shelves anymore. So overall, while the design of that book was a solid 4 out of 5 for me, the story was only a 2 out of 5, unfortunately. Now moving on to The Invocations, which was Evernight's January 2024 book pick. So this is the first book that I actually physically have on hand that I can show you. Now, as far as designs go, I have to say this is probably one of my favorite 𝚑𝚑𝚎 books that they've ever done. I feel like the artist was able to get these characters down in their appearance and their vibes to a T. The back of this book with this house and this creepy guy that just stands there, I love that. Now, in the actual story, the girls grab a book on the dead, which is this book, and obviously I was in love with this design from the get-go. I mean, this is a gorgeous foiling cover, gorgeous design. Basically, I'm getting at the fact that Evernight has been knocking the books out of the park in terms of quality and in terms of design. If anything, the design and the quality of this book is the whole reason why I still like this subscription. I love the sprayed edges. They're a little bit faded and probably a little hard to see on camera, but it is a skeleton. And then the inside is not really necessarily tied directly to the book itself. It's just a little bit more of a cool design, but it does say "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," which is a huge quote that keeps getting brought up time and time again in the book. I gave this book on Goodreads a solid 3 out of 5 in terms of story, and I still hold true to that. What I will say about this book, and the reason why it has gotten a higher rating than the last 2 that I have read, I really liked the characters in this story. I really liked the way that the author set them up. I liked their relationship with one another. And in terms of horror, just straight up horror, creepiness, gore, all of that stuff, this book has the strongest amount of that out of all of the Evernight books, even Murder Road, which is coming up next. I really appreciate what it did, the fact that it was able to do better than its predecessors in that regard, because up until this book, it was looking a little bit sad for me in terms of horror, the actual horror element, even though this is a horror subscription. Now, I personally just didn't really care much for the ending. I think that the ending of this book could have taken a little better of a turn, and I didn't really like the fact, spoilers, that Jude's father in the end was kind of seen as like, oh, well, I was trying to protect you from your brothers, and so basically me being a bad father growing up, that's all good. It didn't write him off as necessarily being a saint in the way that some books have, where a character will just do so much bad and will just be so neglectful and all of that is washed away. And I appreciated that about this book, but I still felt a little bit like, I don't know. I feel like as the head of the house, the man of the house, maybe you could have done things a little bit differently and not pushed your daughter away and made her think that you hated her whole life. I also felt like sometimes this book was a little bit cliche. Emma was the typical witch who was the chosen one by the demon, and Zara was the typical, you know, smart one, but she just really wanted to resurrect her sister to the point where sometimes certain decisions that she made were a little bit bland, and Jude Wolfe was just kind of there, and her main thing was that her brother was her brothers were the villains in the end. So even though I liked the characters, some of the character development, especially towards the end, just felt a little cliche for me. Overall, 3 out of 5 in terms of book plot, 5 out of 5 in terms of design. Now, the last book is Evernight's April 2024 book, which is Murder Road. Now, in terms of design, this is second to the Invocations, but probably above Last to Leave the Room and Silver Nitrate in my personal opinion. This book takes place during the 90s, so I absolutely love this sort of pop art design that they have going on with this book. It was definitely a super unique book and wasn't anything like Evernight has seen before. I do like the little nod to the horror element here, but other than that, it's a pretty like pop arty, bright, very colorful book. I originally thought when I first got this book that the end papers were a little bit bland, a little bit iffy for me. I probably would have preferred something else. But as you read the book, you, spoilers, sort of understand the importance of these photos, which I will go more in depth in my actual spoiler review. The front of this book is a map of Cold Lake Falls, and you can see Atticus Line, which is the road that a lot of this story takes place on. So in terms of story, this one has the highest rating for me on Goodreads. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I was really into it pretty much the whole entire time, which I can't say for any of the other Evernight books. Now, I really appreciate the fact that, and here's where the spoilers come in, that these end papers are pictures of the dead girl who is the one that haunts Atticus Line. So this brunette in these photos, that's her. And I really did get a new appreciation for the end papers when I realized how perfectly they tied into the story, because you don't just see all of these photos at one point in the book. It kind of builds up piece by piece, and then you look back at the book and be like, okay, that's that photo and that's that photo. So why is it a 3.5 out of 5 stars and not a 4 or a 5? I enjoyed the story for what it was, but this was also supposed to be an adult book and it read very YA for me. I think that if some of the super unnecessary talk about the characters getting together in like the backseat of their car or in the hotel room were scrapped, that this book could have just completely been YA. There was nothing else really about it that made it adult for me. And that's just a small nitpick. The other reason why I docked it a few points was because I didn't really think that this was very horror at all, which is a problem that I feel like I'm running into a lot with Evernight's books, is that the author tries to make it horror, and granted this book does have paranormal aspects to it, which I really do appreciate, and it did kind of give off that horror element, but not necessarily in a way that I would label it as horror. I felt like this book was a lot more murder mystery than it was actual horror. The main reason why I gave it a 3.5 was because it just didn't feel as horror to me as I think maybe it could have, and it also didn't feel adult to me at all. It just read very YA. I think overall, Murder Road was probably my favorite Evernight read. I will probably give this book a solid 3.5 out of 5. I definitely enjoyed the plot of this book more than I enjoyed the other 3. Okay, so overall, my thoughts on Evernight as a subscription. In my personal opinion, I think a huge draw for Evernight is the designs of their books, because across the board, no matter which out of the 4 books it was, I can say, yes, this is a very strong, beautiful special edition, even when comparing it to their original book box, or even comparing it to other companies like Fairy Loot, Owl Crate, maybe even Broken Binding. I love Broken Binding, don't get me wrong, their special editions are absolutely beautiful. But I do think certain books, once again, like The Invocations, is a really strong contender against all special editions. Where I think Evernight falls short is their actual book picks themselves. I am a huge fan of the horror genre. It is probably one of my favorite genres ever, which is why I was so excited when 𝚂𝚑𝚘𝚜 said that they were doing this Evernight book subscription, because other than Twisted Retreat, I hadn't really heard of many horror subscriptions prior to this one. A lot of their books just didn't feel very horror to me. Some of them were a little dry, some of them were very hard to get through. The first 2 books for me were pretty difficult to get through, which is a shame because I don't like DNFing books, and I didn't DNF them, so I'm very proud of myself for that. But it got to the point where I was just, especially with Silver Nitrate, I was just kind of reading it to make this video. I wasn't really reading it for my own enjoyment, and had I not wanted to make this video, I probably would have DNF'd it or just wouldn't have bought a copy of the book at all to read. I love the beauty of their editions, but if their plots continue to not be great for me, I might consider canceling, only because I think having a beautiful special edition is one thing, but having a beautiful special edition of a book that you can also appreciate for what it is, which is a book, is really important. Overall, I'd rate the Evernight subscription a solid 3 out of 5. And that 3 is very strong, because of their design. The plot of some of their books, especially the first two, as I've already said, I'm getting a little redundant, I know, is just too low for me to want to give it anything higher. Will I still be getting their books? Yes. Will I continue to get their books if, say, the next 3 book picks they have, I'm still very let down by the plot? Probably not. They did have a teaser that it appears to be that they're doing a new sci-fi subscription. So I think worst case scenario, I drop Evernight, unfortunately, even though I loved the design, and I just end up only getting their sci-fi subscription. I might have to end up doing that because, once again, as of right now, unless the next 2 or 3 books can really hit it out of the park and I actually appreciate them in terms of not only design but also plot, right now, Evernight is just too middle of the road for me to be spending $50 to get it shipped from the UK quarterly when I just don't like them as reads. That is going to be the end of this video. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of Evernight. Do you agree with me? Are they way stronger in terms of design than they are plot? Or are you like, girl, you're crazy? The plot for all of these books has been great. And honestly, I'd actually love to hear your takes to see if you're in the same boat as me or if you think that they're better, because I might just be a little bit too critical on the reads. But yeah, let me know down in the comments below and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!